It's the end of the week, and you know what we do here at the end of the week here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's our mailbag edition. We take all your questions from Pitt fans about Pitt football, Pitt basketball, recruiting, and some other topics as well, because we actually got a bunch of questions this week that dive into some different discussion topics, and we'll kind of address those all at once. But we take your questions throughout the week, and then we answer as many as we can right here on the Morning Pitt Mailbag, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Quick news that came out of yesterday. Pitt got a commitment, another commitment for the 2027 recruiting class. Tyler Reed, the younger brother of Desmond Reed, committed to the Panthers yesterday. He's a sophomore, just like Jacob Thomas, who committed on Saturday. They're both offensive skill guys. Thomas is a receiver, Reed is a running back, and they both have, you'll be shocked about this, a lot of speed. These guys are fast. And you watch the highlight film, they're not the biggest guys, but they're just constantly running away from defenders. I mean, just running away. They're the fastest guy on the field every time. I mean, if these guys get into it's like Desmond Reed. You know, when they get into the open field, they are gone, and then there's nothing you can do about it. And so another commitment. And, you know, it's a guy in, spring of his sophomore year of high school. Signing day is a long time away. You know, it's December of 2026, assuming they don't change the signing day schedule again, which they very well may by that point. But it's a long way. It's a year and a half away until signing day, even more than that. But it's still rather informative to see the kinds of players they are going after, to see the kinds of players they are taking commitments from, and to see Cade Bell's excitement about landing these guys. This is the kind of speed he wants to bring into his offense. You obviously saw what he did with the speed of Desmond Reed. He wants more guys like that, more guys who can break games open with their speed, and that's what he's gotten here in these two sophomore commitments, Jacob Thomas and now Tyler Reed, again, the younger brother of Desmond Reed, which makes for a pretty cool story, a pretty cool angle to everything. So another commitment in for Pitt in the 2027 recruiting class. They've got two commitments in the 2026 class. Those are the guys who are in the spring semester of their junior years. They're going to be seniors in the fall. And then two commitments from the 2027 class. Those are the guys who are sophomores right now. They will be juniors in the fall. So a little bit of recruiting news happening for Pitt, some of it coming from some underclassmen, which we didn't really expect. And then we'll see what comes out of this spring, because next week is spring camp, and a lot of recruits will be visiting during those practices. And so we'll have plenty to talk about there with those guys. So all that aside, let's jump into the mailbag here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, we got great questions this week, as we always do. You know the deal. You know what we do for these mailbags every week. Usually around Tuesday, we'll put up a post on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board calling for questions, asking for people to contribute questions about Pitt football, Pitt basketball, and Pitt recruiting, and then we answer as many as we can here in the Morning Pitt Mailbag on Fridays. I always look forward to doing this. It's always a lot of fun to put these episodes together. I appreciate your contributions. It makes it a little bit easy. You know what I mean? It's nice to have people ask questions, because you guys sort of pick the topics, and I can just kind of respond and react to your questions. And so I always look forward to doing it. Make sure you like this video and subscribe. And then don't forget to go over and check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. It is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting. We've also got the best online community of Pitt sports fans that you're going to find on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We're on the 24/7 Sports Network now. We are starting over, but we have hit the ground running in our first week. And this really is our first week. Today is like day 7. Our first day was last Saturday, March 1st. And we've been rolling since then. We've had a lot of great content on the football, basketball, and recruiting sides. We've got great support from the 247. I keep going back and forth between 247 and 24/7. I'm going to stick with 24/7 because I kind of like how that sounds a little bit better. But we got great support in the 24/7 Sports National Recruiting Team. They've provided great content for us throughout the week, and that's not going to slow down. Those recruiting guys do a great job, and they're going to keep up with us and keep providing content on the message board. So you want to come over and check it out. If you want the best Pitt coverage, this is the place to go, Panther-Lair.com. All right. Speaking of that, so we switched networks, right? On Saturday was our first day moving to the 24/7 Sports Network. It's been a great week so far. Major shout out to everybody who joined us on the site in this first week. Major shout out to everybody at the 24/7 Sports National Team who's helped smooth the transition. Major shout out to Jim and Matt and Houston and Steve and Eric and all our guys who provide coverage for us, for doing a great job with that throughout the week. And of course, and again, the biggest shout out to you guys, the fans who joined us on the site. We're excited to have you here. But we had a few questions in the mailbag about this move and just kind of about network things and that kind of stuff. And so I figure we'll just get these questions out of the way. We'll get to everybody's questions about this move and kind of what we did and why we did it and where we went and everything and how it came about. We'll get to those questions first and just kind of get them out of the way all at once. So H2P Falbert says, how does Panther-Lair work? Is it a company or an entity that partners with networks like you did with 24/7 or what? Never really thought about it till this switch. And then Jay Lazinger asks, I doubt you'll address this, but I have to ask, how did the Rivals 24/7 transition go down? And so those are both interesting questions that, you know, when you kind of work in a company or you're inside something, you don't really think much about what people know of it or think of it on the outside. You don't understand what other people's understanding is on the outside of like what kind of our arrangement was and what our arrangement is now and kind of how that whole thing works. And so I'll lay it out for you and I'll answer the questions on it. So Panther-Lair.com is our site, right? Obviously, I own the domain name. That's how we were able to bring it with us when we transitioned from Rivals to 24/7. But those networks, Rivals and 24/7, and On3 is one of them as well. ESPN, I don't know if they ever got into the team site side. Sports Illustrated has like the team fan sites. You see these like networks. And the networks ultimately provide the infrastructure. You know what I mean? The networks host the sites. The networks have the backbone of it. It's consider it like a blank wall, and then you create all the content, you populate the message boards and things like that. The networks update and maintain the prospect database. They maintain the message boards. They have the infrastructure for all of that. And then they hire someone like me to operate the Pitt website, right? On Rivals or the Pitt website here on 24/7. I don't think anybody else has a Pitt website. Maybe, what is it, Fansided or Sports Illustrated, like all these different things. And that's kind of how it works. Now, I mean, we own the Panther-Lair.com domain name. So when we move that, instead of redirecting and forwarding you to the Rivals Pitt site, it now forwards you to the 24/7 Pitt site. But the ultimate, like the backbone of it, is the network, and that's where it's hosted. So now you're getting Panther-Lair.com content, the content that you've always gotten, the message boards as you've always had them, but it looks different. It's hosted in a different place. It's at a different website. It does different things. It's got different features and bugs and all the ups and downs that come with working on the internet. I like to think that it's still the same thing because we're still pumping out the same kind of content. We still have the same approach to coverage. We still, have the message board community and all of that. But it is in a different place, and so it looks different, and it happens differently, and it'll get conveyed to you differently. And I'd like to think we've only enhanced the product and improved the product as a result of this move. So I mean that's kind of how it works. And so I think a lot of people were caught off guard when we moved from Rivals to 24/7 and said, "Wait, I was subscribing to Panther-Lair all along." Well, you were, but you were subscribing to the Rival. You were subscribing to Panther-Lair through the Rivals network. Now you're going to subscribe to Panther-Lair through the 24/7 Sports network. I think the reality, Jay Lazinger asked about how the whole transition went down. I mean, look, there have been conversations in the past, probably about 6 years ago. I think I said this in one of the videos last week, about 6 years ago, had some conversations with the guys at 24/7 Sports. And it might have even still been called Scout at that point. Eventually Scout and 24/7 sort of became the same thing. But we had some conversations, just didn't get they were interested in starting a Pitt site then and bringing me over to run a Pitt site then. And it just wasn't the right time. It just didn't seem like the right opportunity. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to stay where we were and we were comfortable with it. Fast forward to this past year and, at some point, I forget exactly when the conversation started, overtures were made again, discussions were had, and got pretty far down the road and decided, this is the right time. It's the right time to make the move. And change to a start something new, but kind of continue what we've been doing in a new place. And so that's kind of how it went down. I mean, there's negotiations and conversations and all those different things. That stuff's boring, and on the back end, that's the business side of it. But what it is now is Panther-Lair.com is on the 24/7 Sports Network. We're going to keep pumping out the content that you've come to know and hopefully love, and we're going to do it with some great support from the 24/7 Sports team. Those guys do an awesome job, and we're excited to work with them. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's been great so far. So, all right, that's that stuff. Let's get into the more interesting questions. Chris46 says it's way too early yet, but which of the local Western PA guys do you see committing to Pitt for the 2026 season? I think there's a handful of guys that sort of stand out as being, Pitt has a pretty good shot with. I think there's maybe about 4. There's Lawrence Timmons and Lincoln Hoke, a couple of names that everybody probably recognizes. But there's the 2 guys at Peters Township, Reston Lehman and Lucas Shanafelt. I think they've got a really good chance with those 2 guys. I would probably put them at the top of the list of the guys I think Pitt is most likely to land. And then those guys from North Allegheny, I think there's a real chance there as well. But I like the 2 Peters Township players. I think Shanafelt might be one of the best players in Western PA and in the WPIAL. And I think they've got a great chance of landing those guys, maybe during the spring, but, if not before, then probably during like June official visits. For UPH2P asks, not to the level of Kyle Lewis or Rasheem Biles, but what players do you see making a big jump in production in 2025? So this is, Biles and Lewis obviously took a huge leap. I think every year you're going to have guys who take a giant leap or a pretty big leap. I mean, they're thrust into new roles. They're playing a lot more than they ever played before, and they, turn in a big production. Excuse me. You kind of ruled out Biles and Lewis, so we're not going to go to those guys. They made their big jump. Is it cheating if I say Braylon Lovelace? I think Lovelace is going to be the starting, my assumption right now, and we'll see if this changes next week when we're actually in spring camp, but my assumption right now is that Lovelace will be the starting middle linebacker, will play a ton, and I think he'll have a really productive, good season, and really burst onto the scene. So he would be one guy. I think, Kenny Johnson, who's been around for 2 years, has made a lot of plays and done a lot of good things, I think could take a giant leap forward in terms of production and be this team's number 1 wide receiver, as he should be. And, I think Juelz Goff could produce too, particularly if he gets an opportunity if Desmond Reed has to miss some time. And again, I'm not going to go through my whole spiel about how I don't think Desmond Reed is fragile or something like that. It's just a very physical position. You're going to have multiple backs who get opportunities to produce. And I think Juelz Goff could be one who puts up some numbers. Now, it might not be as big of a leap forward as what Lewis and Biles did last year, or what I think Lovelace will do this year, or what I think Cruz Brookins, actually. Cruz Brookins is another one. I think he's going to play a ton and be really good and put up some big numbers. I think Jesse Anderson will be in the rotation at safety. I think there's a lot of guys, like those young defensive tackles, even some of the old defensive tackles. I think like Fitzsimmons, Nick James, Isaiah Neal, Francis Brew. I think these guys, Jasir Whittington, I think will make an impact as a redshirt freshman this year. I think you'll see some big production leaps there. There's a lot of good young talent on this team, particularly on the defensive side, and I think you're going to see it shine through. I also feel like if I name just about every second or third year player on the defense, I'm bound to get the 1 or 2 that actually do take that big step forward, because I just sort of realized I was naming guys at every position. But I do think Cruz Brookins is going to be really good. I think Braylon Lovelace is going to be really good. I think those young defensive tackles, and again, even the old defensive tackles who haven't really broken out yet, I think they're going to be really good. I think there's really good talent on this defense. The biggest question on the defense is going to be the defensive ends. And I don't know if I see an obvious breakout candidate there, aside from the transfers. And the transfers they brought in are going to have to play a lot. So that's probably the biggest question mark, I would say. And it's the area where they need somebody to take a big step forward, but I don't really see that candidate. They're going to miss Sincere Edwards. I think Sincere Edwards is going to be a pretty big loss. I think he already is a pretty big loss for this defense. And I think they're going to miss him. I really do. Let's see. Ski 11585 says, what odds would you put on each eligible member of the Hoops team returning next year? I really don't know. I just don't know. I mean, for me to sit here and speculate, for me to put odds on it would be me speculating. Be like, well, I think Cam Corden's going to do this, or I think Jalen Lowe has had a really difficult season, particularly the last 2 months, just like everyone else. But I think he's had it's been challenging for him, and I think you can see it. I think you can see the frustration. I think you can see where this season hasn't worked out the way he wanted it to. So, I mean, he's going to face a real decision, because I think no matter what you want to say about Jalen Lowe and how he's played this year and what your impression of him is, he could do well on the open market. Particularly if, given his connection to Jai Lucas, he decides to look at Miami. I think Miami would have ample NIL resources to try to lure him away. So that opportunity is going to be there. It's going to be a question for Jalen Lowe of whether he wants to stick with Jeff Capel and try to improve here, or get away from a situation that feels like, on the outside at least, has turned pretty negative and even borderline toxic. Not that I necessarily think the locker room is borderline toxic, but I think the whole sort of stigma around the team and the program right now on the outside has gotten pretty negative. And so he may very well decide he doesn't want to be a part of that anymore and move on. You know, what does Amsal Delilich do? I don't know. I'd like to see him play more, because thought he looked pretty good on Wednesday night. But I mean, you guys know where I stand on that whole question of Amsal Delilich. I think Brandon Cummings is pretty likely to come back. He's one that I would say I probably feel confident about returning, but I don't know. You know, I don't know what the Diaz-Graham twins are going to do. I don't know what Cam Corrin is going to do. I don't know what, some of those guys who aren't getting in the game, like Papa Amadou Kanti, or Marlon Barnes, or Amdi Najai. Like, I don't know. You would think that guys who are not playing and can't even sniff minutes would probably be the guys who would look into the transfer portal. I think that's typically what happens. And so you're probably going to lose a few of those guys off the end of the bench. The question, what's really notable and relevant, is more about, Delilich, the Diaz-Graham twins, Lowe, Corrin, and Conti. I would say are the guys that you're really kind of keeping an eye on. I think you'd like to hold on to as many of them as you can. Certainly there will be a priority system in there somewhere, but you'd like to hold on to as many as you can. I just don't. I don't know how those guys are leaning right now. Let's see. H2P SSOE22 has a long question here. Do you foresee any changes being made to the basketball assistant coaching staff this offseason? After 7 years, they have some of the same issues they had day one. I'd like to see a new coach for the big men. Think that's Tim O'Toole, who can effectively coach defense and rebounding. I'd like to see a new strength and conditioning coach, because there's very little bulk on this team. I'd also like to see a number 2 brought in who's an X's and O's guy who can operate effectively as an OCDC would. Capel ain't going anywhere, and his team is clearly lacking in these 3 areas. Do these changes seem feasible to you? And from what you've observed, do you foresee any changes happening? Yeah, I don't know what Jeff Capel is going to do with his coaching staff. It's wild to me that they've made it this far without changing any of the principals, O'Toole and Jason Capel and Milan Brown. You never see a coaching staff stick together as long as these guys have. And so at some point, somebody's going to go, either of their own choice or not. You talk about the X's and O's thing, and a lot of people talk about X's and O's. You need somebody who can really draw up a play. But the thing is, I think you have to understand who Jeff Capel is. I think Jeff Capel, to bring in someone to sort of specialize in X's and O's and running a really set, firm offense like Jamie Dixon used to do, I think that runs counter to who Capel is as a coach. And actually, our next question here, H2P 2006 asks, is there a specific philosophy Pitt should be looking for in a basketball coach? The modern trend in football seems to be bright, young, offensive-oriented minds. Is there such a trend in basketball? I don't know about the trends, but I think when you look at the type of coach, Jeff Capel is not a Jamie Dixon type with a really strict, rigid style of play that you have to fit in exactly right. I mean, Jeff Capel is far more free-flowing. He's far more just let the players make plays. But maybe there's a question to be asked about whether that type of approach can work at a school like Pitt, where you're not a blue blood. You're not going to get the 5-star guys. You're not going to get the top 5 players in the McDonald's All-Americans. And you're probably not going to have the resources to really get those high-end guys out of the transfer portal. So do you need to compensate for the lack of talent with what we used to always call, rather derisively, overcoaching? And maybe there's something to be said for that. Maybe the sort of freewheeling, go out and play style. And I think there's more nuance to it than that. I don't think Jeff Capel just rolls the ball in the court and lets his guys play. I think he does have things drawn up. He does try to run plays. I don't think it's quite as untethered as some would make it out to be. But it's certainly not as rigid and confined as, like I said, what Jamie Dixon used to run. But there's a question about, if you're at Pitt, do you need to have a little bit more control in that regard, that we're going to out-scheme you, that we're going to play, be so good in what we're attempting to execute that it'll be difficult for you to stop us? And I think that's a valid question, but that, I just don't know if a head coach can change from one to the other. Not that those are the only two ways a head coach could be, but I don't know if a head coach could go from being as sort of loose and amorphous as Capel is, and into something more akin to what Jamie Dixon was, which not everybody was a fan of at the time, if you recall. So I don't know. That's a tricky one. I think that's a tricky transition to make. I think it's a difficult. I'm not sure one guy can change like that. I think you need if that's how you want to play. If you feel like to who was it, H2P 2006's question of the type of coach Pitt should be looking for. If you feel like Pitt should have a coach like that, then you probably need a different coach. Let's see. Atwood 409 says, do you think Pitt basketball's NIL budget is in danger due to donor frustration with Capel? You probably. I think there'd be questions about where the money came from to begin with, of what kind of NIL funds were available to Capel, and sort of what generated those and what provided those funds. I think the university is going to be able to do more in that regard going forward, in addition to the revenue sharing. And so, maybe donor frustration has less of an impact. But yeah, you're still going to be relying in large part on money coming in from fans. And if the fans are saying, like, dude, why are you 16-14, after 30 games? Like, how are you realistically, potentially on a track towards 16-16 season? How is that possible? And you want me to give you more money after you just went 500? Like, I could see that reaction. And I don't think it's going to help. Even though, like, there is, like, a mindset, and this is probably what Pitt has to sell, through the collective arm and through Jeff Capel's own fundraising. What they have to probably sell is, look, you didn't like this product. You need to help us by donating more NIL so we can get better players. Now, that's not going to fly with everyone. Not everybody's going to buy that way of thinking, although some might, but the majority probably won't. 4422 Hike says, do you, Panther-Lair, and I think you mean Panther-Lair, promote giving to Alliance 412 or the University Athletic Department? So I won't promote one way or the other. You do with your money what you are so inclined to do, but you understand where that money's going and the impact that money has. What a donation to Alliance 412 and the collective and NIL-based fundraising, that money goes, directly to the players and is a direct enticement to try to get the good players to stay and get more good players to join. Donations to the athletic department eventually will work their way around to that through revenue sharing, through NIL contribution, because the university can be involved in the NIL side. And so there is, this athletic director's fund or whatever they called it, like that money will get to the players as well. There's probably a more direct route through the collective, I would say. The university would probably tell you, the athletic department would tell you they want you to go through the athletic department. But the direct path, probably the most direct path, I would say, from my understanding, is through the collective. Let's see. I wanted to get one or two more in here. Disco 302 H2P says, do you expect a lot of transfers when the spring portal window opens? Well, I don't know if you're talking about football or basketball. Basketball, I think you'll see a decent number. There's a bunch of scholarship guys at the end of the bench who aren't playing. I think you'll lose a handful of them, and then you'll probably get one or two guys that are playing that will go. It wouldn't surprise me if there were 5 transfers off the basketball team, or 6, somewhere around there. It wouldn't be a shock, and it shouldn't be a shock. I mean, that's just sort of the reality of the situation. In football, I think you'll see less. I think the spring portal window in football, it has less activity. It had less activity last year than the winter window. I think it'll have less activity again. So whereas Pitt lost, or had 20-some guys or whatever it was leave for the portal in December, I imagine there will be less than 10 that go here in the spring window. And likewise, Pitt added 19 guys or whatever it was. I need to update my list, actually. Pitt added, close to 20 guys, more than a dozen for sure, in the winter portal window. And I think they will, I would imagine they add single digits in the post-spring portal window. There are fewer guys available. I think the talent pool is diminished. I think it becomes a seller's market for these portal guys that you pay, inflated prices. Sorry, I keep hitting the hard P here on the microphone. I think you pay inflated portal prices for these guys in the spring window because there are fewer of them available. And if you're really out there shopping, you're desperate for an offensive lineman, desperate for a pass rusher, you're going to pay a premium, whereas maybe you could have gotten the same guy or same level of guy for a decent amount less in December. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why a school like Pitt doesn't really go too hard in the spring window. They added a few guys last year, and I don't think any of them did anything, right? Chief Borders, I think, was a spring addition. He played, but didn't really do much. Anthony Johnson got hurt early on. Jeremiah Anglin never got on the field and transferred. I forget if there was anybody else in the spring window, but I don't think you got a huge impact out of it. What you really want is you want to add guys in December and January so those guys can come in and take part in spring camp and be ready to help you in the season. That's the goal. That's like what you're looking for. Once you get into the post-spring window, now you'd like to get guys who could help you, but chances are you probably have a better chance of finding maybe like a guy like Jeremiah Anglin was supposed to be, like a redshirt freshman who you're hoping to have around for a few years. That didn't exactly work out with him, but that's probably a better kind of target. But again, the prices are going to be so inflated that I just don't think it's worth the investment to go too crazy in the spring, unless you're absolutely desperate, and then they can kind of rake you, hold your feet to the fire, so to speak. That's the word I was looking for. All right, great questions there. We went a little bit long on this one, so we'll save a few questions for next week. I always like to keep a few in the bank in case we don't get as many questions next week. But thanks everybody who participated in the mailbag this week. Thanks everybody who came over and joined the site here in our first week. It means a lot. We really appreciate it, and we're going to keep doing our best to give you the best Pitt coverage that you can find anywhere on the internet at Panther-Lair.com. And then, of course, don't forget the message boards where you can hang out and interact with other Pitt fans all day, every day. We'll have a live thread going during the Pitt-Boston College game tomorrow, so you definitely want to be a part of that. Those live threads are always fun to have those conversations during the game, so make sure you tune in on our center court at the Pete message board. We'd love to have you come and hang out. All right, I think that's about it. Like and subscribe at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Have a great Friday. I hope it's been a great week for you. Enjoy your weekend, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.